Welcome to Mission Evolution Radio Show with Gwilda Wiyaka, bringing together today's leading experts to uncover ever-deepening spiritual truths and the latest scientific developments in support of the evolution of humankind. For more information on Mission Evolution Radio with Gwilda Wiyaka, visit www.missionevolution.org. And now, here's the host of Mission Evolution, Miss Gwilda Wiyaka.
We can talk about them, think about them, and openly express them. Yet, imbalanced emotion seems to stay with us, raising havoc in our lives until Mission Evolution Radio TV show is coming to you around the world on the X-Zone Broadcast Network, xzbn.net. Joining us from Germany to consider the emotional healing capacity of the human body is licensed clinical psychologist Dr. Raja Selvam. His website, integralsomaticspsychology.com. Dr. Selvam, thank you so much for joining us on Mission Evolution.
Thank you, Gwilda. It's a pleasure to be with you again.
Yes, it's a pleasure to see you. So you're still in Germany there, huh?
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, it's a pretty country. I've always enjoyed it. So we're going to be talking a lot about embodiment today. Let's start out by having you define embodiment as we'll be using it.
Embodiment can mean different things to different people. So it's important to define what I mean by it. I'm interested in a particular type of embodiment, the embodiment of emotion. And what that is, simply is the act of expanding the conscious experience of an emotional experience to as much of the body as possible. And when we do that, why on earth would we do that? When we get anxious, we're busy trying to get rid of it. We're trying to think of things that will reduce anxiety, or do things that will reduce anxiety, or breathe in some particular way to reduce anxiety. Why would it make sense to expand the conscious experience of anxiety to as much of the body as possible? This needs to be explained. Otherwise, people are not going to even try to attempt to do it and get the benefit of it. See, what happens is that when we expand any emotion to more of the body, the emotion gets more tolerable. But you can think of lifting a 50-kilogram bag with one arm or two arms, which would be more strenuous for the body to lift it with one arm, right? So it's the same thing with emotional baggage. So when we lift it with both arms, more of the body, it becomes more tolerable. That means we can stay with it for a longer period of time. What is emotion? Emotion tells us about the impact something is going to have on us, right? Like, for example, the US election. And so this creates anxiety on both sides. I often feel anxious. I'm a US citizen. And so why would I expand that anxiety? I feel it in the chest, and I actually try to expand it to my belly, even to my arms and legs. And when I do that, it becomes more tolerable. And when I do that, what happens is that it resolves. It becomes more bearable. The brain is able to process it better. But as I said, it tells us something about emotion, tells us something about the impact something is having on us. We need to send the information. We feel it in the body. We need to take it, bring it to the brain and process it, right? And that's what we are able to do. So when we expand the conscious experience of emotion, such as anxiety, the brain is able to process the emotion and the situation in which the emotion is occurring. So that is why, that is what emotional embodiment is. The task of practice of expanding one's conscious awareness of one's emotion, grief, disappointment, of just feeling bad, to more of the body, and then see what happens. It becomes more tolerable, and then the brain processes it better, and ideas come, meanings come to what to do about it or what not to do about it. Yeah.
So if you could help us understand here, what do you mean by expanding it to the body? How do you literally do that? I mean, I feel emotion, I tighten up, things happen. I know I tighten up, but how do you consciously into the body?
Yeah. It's a good question. No? Um, Sometimes all it takes is to know that an emotion can be experienced throughout the body. People don't know that. People believe that it's experienced in the brain, which it can be, but sometimes people feel it in the belly or the chest. That's where they think it is. But we know through scientific research that an emotion, especially a strong emotion, affects the whole body. Emotion is the impact something is having on our life. So if you're facing a life-threatening situation, it makes sense that every cell in the body would feel that. Therefore, it is potentially there everywhere. But what we tend to do is we kind of constrict different places in our body not to feel it. Because nobody, including me or you, likes to feel unpleasant emotions. This is something that we don't want to feel. We want to feel pleasant emotions. It's built into us. Pleasant emotions are more survival promoting. So that's what we do. But then, in an attempt to push the emotion away, we push the information away, and then we develop sometimes serious psychophysiological symptoms, such as asthma or body pain. Any number of psychophysiological symptoms you can develop by initiating physiological differences like constriction. That's one of the 7 differences I write about in my book. And then that makes us stuck in the past. We don't quite move beyond it.
So
Yeah.
let me see if I understand this. Um, when we have an emotion, particularly if it's a life-threatening one, and you can understand how the body would need to be involved in that, because then you have to either just freeze or flee, right, or fight. That's all body stuff. Um, but if it's an unpleasant one and it hangs around like this low-lying anxiety that we get from our world at large, do we experience it in the body, but then disassociate from that part of our body so that we don't experience it and just kind of leave it there,
That's
percolating away?
yeah, that is what leaves us in a stuck place.
Okay.
It's better to feel it more throughout the body in order to resolve it.
Instead of running away from the body so that we don't have to feel it.
Exactly.
So if we
These defenses arise very early. I had an early separation. I couldn't bear the experience of being separate from my mother. And but then I couldn't have lived if I'd just allowed my organs to be so dysregulated, because the unpleasant emotions are dysregulating. And so I shut down, and I used the same defense every time I had a disappointment or grief or separation. That did not do well by me in relationship. So every time somebody broke up with me or I broke up with somebody, I would have a great deal of difficulty, or I wouldn't be able to let go. But once I understood that I can feel it in the body, expand that emotion in the body, then the brain processes it better. I can at the basic level, I can tolerate this, so I don't have to keep running after that person.
so the if we lock it in the body and then disassociate versus process it. So the natural way would be to feel it in the body and then process it. But
Exactly.
because we don't like the feeling, we feel it in the body and then we disassociate from the body, it stays there. I'm following
Yeah.
so far. Does that start to develop illness, physical illness
Yeah.
with that locked emotion?
I wouldn't say it's locked in there. We prevent the formation of the emotion. So I expect to be left from a childhood experience. So when I'm in a relationship, it comes up, triggered by association. I try to prevent that from being generated. It's not stored. And in that process, I might, end up having respiratory symptoms such as asthma. Asthma is due to many reasons. Sometimes it's because of people are locking up grief or preventing the grief from being generated so that they can process this relationship, let go, and get into another relationship.
So it sounds to me like this is kind of like people's default setting, really, in our culture, isn't it?
This is the nature of human beings. Sigmund Freud said at the very beginning of the development of psychology that people follow the pleasure principle. The brain prefers pleasant experiences because they underlying these pleasant experiences are states of regulation and less stress in the body. Unpleasant emotions, on the other hand, involve dysregulation of the physiology and increasing stress, which is not good for survival. The brain is built like that. And therefore, we need to understand that in order to work through a difficult experience that we have not worked through, to face the unpleasant emotions, we have to go one step further. We have to be aware of that tendency, but to override that and do it in such a way that it's not so difficult. And that's what the embodying emotions I find to be very important. I can give you a quick example of some work I did a couple of days ago.
Well, we're just about out of time in this segment, so we'll have to pick up with that on the other side. But it sounds to me like you're saying that the embodiment of emotion is a fairly natural response. It's us then not dealing with it, disassociating from it when we feel it versus working with it while it's there. Are we on the same page there?
Exactly, but and expanding the emotional experience in the body is a relatively new method.
Ah,
Even body psychotherapies don't do it. I was in a
right.
conference in Istanbul last week,
Well,
and
I'm sorry, we're going to have to take that station break. Dr. Silvam and I will return very shortly, so don't go away. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. How do we find emotions in our body? With us this hour discussing emotional embodiment is Dr. Raja Silvam. His website, integralsomaticspsychology.com. Dr. Raja, I was a body worker at one point, and we had this form called Neo Reichian, and it was accessing through body work emotions that are stored in the body. But one thing I noticed was you could hit the point on a person, and they'd flop and flail and grieve and this and that. And but then you could come back another week and hit the same spot and get the same results. So I didn't see anything changing. Is this what you're talking about? How there has to be a particular method to process
yeah,
body emotions?
the Reichian and Neo-Reichian therapies are still around.
Yes. Hmm.
They help us to um, undo the defenses in the body so that we can access the emotions and express them strongly, right?
Hmm.
Now, they, of course, thought that the emotions were stored, and we now know that emotions were not stored. Body defenses are merely blocking the formation, the generation of emotions.
Ooh, help me with that. How does it do that?
The for a simple example, I feel anxiety right now, right? But then I can control the anxiety by just constricting my chest muscles that are involved in breathing. So am I storing the anxiety? I'm not. I've prevented the anxiety from being generated.
So the body generates the emotion?
Yeah. The the brain can generate emotion, the body can generate emotion. Often both parts are involved in the generation of emotion.
That's pretty interesting. What's the mechanism behind that?
Many different types of mechanism. For example, I'll give you a simple example. For example, uh, please smile and say, I'm sad now.
Well, it's kind of hard to do both.
Exactly. Because what you're feeling is joy. So through the facial muscles, you generate joy. And
Oh,
yeah, exactly. So
interesting.
like that, every system in the body can generate emotions or defend against them through seven different types of dynamics. So constriction, deconstriction of the musculature is just one of them.
So it starts to make me think about actors and actresses that are very effective. Okay, they're
Exactly.
using this modality. I mean, they're using this capability of the physical body.
Exactly. In fact, There's the research that shows that if you block the facial muscles from being involved in an emotional experience by just having somebody bite on a pen while
Mhm.
they're watching a very emotionally stimulating movie or movie clip, their brain stops working emotionally. Not
Interesting.
not only is that is true, it also stops processing the situation itself, the meanings and the behaviors. That is why, and there are other studies that show the same thing with respect to other parts of the body. And and Reiki and Neo-Reiki therapies, were effective because they were able to access the emotions by allowing the body to generate the emotions. But they stopped short of one thing, that eventually you have to develop a capacity for the emotion, to be with the emotion in order to process it completely. So they were able to undo the defenses to generate the emotions, but they let it go, wasted it, so to speak. It's
Yes,
like
and it always seemed like it didn't go anywhere that it needed
exactly,
to. That was my
exactly,
experience, certainly.
exactly. So if you then you expand it in your body so that you can be with it for a longer period of time, you get much better outcomes. This is what some Reichian and Neo-Reichian body-oriented psychotherapists who study my method of embodying emotions tell me. So,
How do you expand it?
well, there are so many ways. I have, for example, just expanding your awareness to more of the body. Let's say I have anxiety here. Sometimes all I have to do is to expand my awareness to more of the body, my belly, for the emotion to follow. Because energy follows awareness and experience follows energy, the first principle of energy. Or I might put one hand here where the anxiety is and put the other hand on the belly and use the second principle of energy, that when you connect two places in the body, the energy will connect between the two and the experience will too. But those are the simple techniques. A lot of my approach is about different ways of working with our body in order to expand and regulate the body so that emotion can expand and regulate in it. Because we have to expand it in such a way that the emotion becomes more bearable and regulated, not in a way that it leads to unbearable experience. That can happen, for example, in Reiki and Neo-Reiki therapy. So just working with the diaphragm to open it up and allow the emotion comes, and you end up screaming it out, right?
Yeah, a person's overwhelmed by it.
So we have to expand it in such a way so that it expands and regulates in the body and becomes more tolerable. A lot of the approach of integral somatic psychology is about that, not just working with this body. This is something that we will talk about later. Body oriented. See, regular psychotherapy without that doesn't pay attention to the body is what we call a no body problem.
No body problem. So
The body worker, right?
what you've been saying has brought up a question for me. You're saying, okay, I feel it in my chest, the anxiety, but if I put my hand on my belly, I can say, okay, I can feel it there. Are there organs that are particularly effective for different emotions?
I don't believe in that because the emotion is a function of the whole body. It's
Okay,
possible that some organs are more important than others, right? But organs as a whole are very important part of the physiology of emotions. That is true. But whether heart is more involved in this, liver is more involved in that, as they would say in Chinese medicine, is not what we find. We find if there's fear, it's everywhere.
okay, okay. Because everything has to respond, right?
And if you're really sad, the whole being is sad to the tips of your toes.
Hmm.
So I don't believe that all organ specialists in different emotions. So
So, if we break down an illness around unprocessed emotion, is it predictable at all or random?
in predictive in what way?
Okay, well,
Yeah,
you mentioned that asthma
yeah.
oftentimes is unexpressed grief. So that's particular. That's an emotion and a particular spot in the body where an illness breaks out. I was wondering if different illnesses can reliably relate to different emotions that haven't been processed.
No, I didn't. I've worked with people with asthma with fear in this
Hmm.
area,
Hmm.
in the chest area. So it doesn't break down that way.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
In a way, it makes it simpler if you think about it. It doesn't matter what emotion it is. You know, wherever you have find it, expand it to other parts of the body to the extent possible. When I say to the extent possible, not everybody has to expand it everywhere. I worked with a woman in France with asthma from a breakup, and we ended up looking at it was sadness, right? But there was only a little bit of sadness right here and under the eyes, and a little bit in the face. That's it. That's how far we got. It looked as though nothing had happened, but that was enough for her to break through to her emotion of grief and not have asthma. She had grief that was very painful, but she didn't have asthma that she had suffered for a year after the break.
So we can heal physical ailment by dealing with the underlying emotion.
Yes, they say that 25% to one third of the symptoms that people go to medical symptoms, medical doctors from medical relief are estimated to be psychophysiological or psychosomatic, the new word for it. In nature, this is not my estimate. This is by the Association of Psychophysiological Disorders in the US, formed by doctors.
So if you have so often people say, well, if it's psychosomatic, it has no value. It has no validity. That's the word I wanted. What do you say to that?
Well, there's a literature on psychophysiological symptoms. We don't call it psychosomatic for that very reason. Psychosomatic has come to mean that it's not all in your mind. You just have to change the
Exactly.
meaning.
Hmm.
Psychophysiological means it is there, it has to do with the body, but it's psychological in nature. So we have so much research that shows that psychophysiological symptoms arise in people who have had many adverse childhood e- experiences or traumas, and who do not know, did not learn how to process emotions in childhood. So
And so we have people, there's a whole thing about adverse childhood experiences causing, major physical problems in later life. It sounds like this is related.
right, the a study A study is another example, tells you that shows how early childhood traumas are highly correlated, measured by the adverse childhood experiences, are highly correlated with physical, even medical symptoms later on in life. Yeah. So
Would you say that there is illness without emotional component or emotional component without impact on the body?
of course there are so many illnesses that are genetic,
Hmm.
and there are so many illnesses that have to do with aging. As we age, uh, you know, uh, I read a book on dying. Uh, if you do an autopsy on somebody who dies of old age, you will find one or more of the seven diseases there.
Well, we're going to have to pick up on that, the seven diseases, on the other side of a station break. Dr. Silvam and I will return. So you stay here. We'll be right back. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. What is the emotional body? This is Mission Evolution. Our guest this hour is Dr. Raja Selvam. His website, integralsomaticpsychology.com. Dr. Raja, we hear about the emotional body. How does that differ from emotional embodiment?
The body is also the emotional body.
Okay.
The physiology of regulation that keeps the body alive is also the physiology of emotion. So there is no separate emotional body or cognitive body or behavioral body. We have just one body.
Go figure,
Um,
we're integrated, right?
yeah, this is what science is now finding, that cognition, emotion, behavior, all three are inseparable. in the brain and the body physiology, as opposed to the older idea that things can be located in different places.
And that says something about what's happened to medicine at this point where we are, okay, you're sent to this specialist for this little organ and you're sent to, but it seems like we chase stuff around, but there's no cohesion, and healing is kind of difficult to find through that method.
Yeah.
So how much would you say that our undealt with emotions impact the rest of our well-being, mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual?
Yeah, the estimate I gave you from the Psychophysiological Disorder Association is it's somewhere between 25% to 33, one third percent.
And we could have an impact then if we find some way of dealing with it. And I understand you're working on that.
Yeah, psychology is making a correction because psychology used to think you have to just change behavior. And then it said you just had to change meaning. Now, psychology is finding through neuroscience, hard neuroscience, that it's emotion that is in every moment is determining your thinking in every possible way and in your behavior in every possible way. So, therefore, it makes sense to find the emotion and regulate it. Then it can regulate cognition and behavior, right? Because we also know that uncontrolled emotion can lead to crimes of passion, right? Or uh, so so embodying emotion is one way to make it more tolerable so that we don't act out with crimes of passion and give the brain enough time to process it so that we act appropriately so that we don't end up proposing to a woman on the second date because we feel so much passion and so
So if we're so emotional, and emotion is really driving so much of this, how many emotions are there?
there are any number of emotions. It was an idea that there were only few emotions, basic emotions. Then they said there are more emotions you combine too, but there's an unlimited number of emotions, and even feeling bad and good are emotions. You know, this leads to a funny situation where client goes to a therapist and says, I'm having a great deal of difficulty in this. I'm feeling really bad in my life today. And the therapist says, "What do you feel?" You see the problem? They're telling you that they're feeling very bad, and sometimes we just feel bad, awful, and that is an emotion. And you can actually expand that emotion. And when you do that, you come to know what that emotion is because the brain can process it better, what situation it has to do with, what to do about it, and so on. So unlimited number of emotions. I would say, if you, the listener, is looking, just feeling bad and they don't have an emotion, they think, just expand that emotion in the body. Another way of expanding the emotion of the body, I want to give people some tips because, I want this knowledge to be out there, not only available to therapists that people have to pay. And that's why even when I write books, I write them with the self-help in mind, you know and I ask therapists who use the method to give the book to the client so that they can be part of it, they can learn it because this is something that they're going to need it for the rest of their life. One other way to improve expand emotion is to vocalize it. uh, 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 Very often the repression of emotion by constraining expression is a powerful is the way in which we make the emotion not available to the brain. And so I often say, for example, somebody comes to me and says, I'm feeling pain in this area. I've been to a doctor, I've been to a body worker. It keeps coming back. And funnily enough, it's not there all the time. Sometimes it's there. And I want and I say, okay, it's there now. Yeah, it's there now. That's why I came to you. Then say, feel that. That doesn't feel good, the pain. And go express it through the face and voice. Uh, uh, uh. Sure enough, it somehow the emotion starts to come through. It just feels bad. You expand it. then it ends up being sadness or something else that they recognize more as an emotion.
So instead of having this locked down that just feels bad, we're able to expand it into our body, which helps us differentiate what
Yeah.
we're dealing with.
Yeah, and vocalization leads to nonverbal expression throughout the body. That's another way of expanding. You're asking me, how do you do it? There are any number of ways of expanding it. And by just not working with this body, but also working with other bodies that we have. It's something that we can talk about later in the interview.
So the vocalizing that has sound,
Yeah.
okay, but it also has frequency or vibration.
Mhm.
Do both of those help with the expansion?
Yeah, I have a simpler scientific explanation. When we say expression is 10% verbal, 90% nonverbal, right?
Mhm.
So when you try to express something, try to express, this is what happens. You start to talk to your friend about not feeling good about something, then you start crying, and then you start feeling sad, etc. Right? So how does that happen? It it makes the rest of the body try to express it non-verbally, right? By changing the posture or opening up the muscles, and the emotion gets more generated in the body too. Yeah.
So
And you're right. I mean, that could be through vibration, etc. At the basic levels.
one thing I've seen that was pretty interesting was having a person take on a posture of an emotion or this or that, and actually accessing their personal unprocessed emotion in that regard. Are you familiar with that, and what do you have to
Yeah,
say about that?
we use it all the time because
I
we know
wonder.
that posture is one way in which we, um, let's say, uh, create an emotion. So let's say if somebody wants to process helplessness, despair, you have them do that. It's easier. Or if you want to defend against it, you have them do that.
Mhm.
So the posture can be used to defend against or to get more into the emotion. Yes.
And when you're working with someone and you're getting them more into the emotion, is there a risk of them becoming overwhelmed? And if so, what do you do about it?
Well, you can bring them out.
Okay.
You can just stop supporting the emotion and have them do things that can be regulating. For example, if you were to put your one hand on the forehead, one hand on the lower part of the brain, essentially two fingers on your neck and three fingers on the lowest part of the brain, then this will be regulating the body and regulating the emotion in it too. So that there are many techniques to regulate the person down and out. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons we don't have as much abreaction in a catharsis in our approach, in the approach I teach, as it is in some body oriented therapies that just undo the defenses through breath
Right.
or body work, and then one feels shaky and quite a bit. So not
Right.
that, not that, one doesn't suffer in facing one's suffering in embodying emotion, but it's not as rocky. We build a bigger boat for the turbulence of life. That's what I say.
I like that visual.
Yeah.
So when you're holding different points, are you working with pressure points or acupuncture points?
No, here the prefrontal cortex, this part of the brain here is very regulating of emotions because it's the highest part. It's called the limbic cortex. The highest part of the higher brain, part of that has to do with emotion. This one, we are trying to regulate the brainstem that that regulates all the autonomic processes, which are very autonomic nervous system, which is very involved in emotion. So it's more scientifically based.
So is it because of the energy in our hands
Yeah.
going into those places?
Yeah. With
So
intention, because our hand is designed by nature to regulate our bodies and others' bodies. If that is the intent, we can also kill them, right? It's it's a through electromagnetic as well as quantum mechanical energies. We are learning that more. So it's intention. So and
so
and and look at
if you see a
yeah,
child that's hurt, they immediately do this. Or
exactly.
a mother will rub their little head when they bump it.
Yeah,
That's a natural
yeah. Yeah.
drawing to use that natural ability, isn't it?
I did a war trauma course. I've done war trauma courses for Ukrainians, Palestinians, and Israelis.
Mm.
In the Israeli course, I did supervision a little later, and one mother came to me and said, she said, I don't, I'm a psychotherapist, but I don't work with the body. And I became very curious about, you said you can do that, right? So my son, this is just after the war had started last year, my son was not able to sleep, my teenage son. And I said, can I try something on you? And she said, she didn't know whether it would work. He said, okay. So, she put a hand here on the forehead, and then he fell asleep after a while.
Well, we're going to have to take another station break.
Sure.
Please stay with us as Dr. Selvam and I continue to explore the healing power of emotional embodiment. This is Mission Evolution, www.missionevolution.org. Are there more levels to the human body than meets the eye? This
Yes.
is Mission Evolution, missionevolution.org. We're continuing our discussion with Dr. Rajat Selvam. Dr. Silvam, that's the $24 question. You originally come from India. Is emotional embodiment viewed the same in the East as it is in the West?
The idea of emotional embodiment is old and new. Yeah. Um, all spiritual approaches, serious spiritual approaches, uh, require for spiritual development a greater capacity to tolerate opposites in emotional experience, right? In the limited body that we have from birth to death. Yeah. Um, the difference is the following. In Western body psychotherapy, most of the approaches, uh, they have what I call the one body problem. They believe that we have only one body that is conceived in the womb and, like buried in a tomb or cremated. Yeah. And all of experiences, including awareness, is a function of that, even though there's no proof that the awareness is a function of the body or the brain, that goes into the coffin. And so so body psychotherapies and psychotherapies also follow that, and they're only looking at this body. They're working with this body, doing different things to it, as you saw in Reichian and Neo-Reichian therapies yourself, right?
Mhm.
In the East, this is because we are in the scientific paradigm where only that which can be seen or measured is real. But we know in science, in quantum physics, for example, that very quickly we reach a level of even this body that goes into the tomb that cannot be measured or seen, etc. So there is that level, right? In the East, they would say there's a subtle level of, they would call this body the gross body because it's big enough that can be measured at some level, but then it also a subtle level that cannot be measured at all. So in the West, what is considered to be the body, especially Western psychotherapy, is only a superficial level of this body that goes into the tomb, right? In the East, for thousands of years, people using awareness as a tool have discovered more about who we are, you know, that is what our body is. It turns out there is another body, that body is now, quite documented in near-death experiences, research on near-death experiences, out-of-body experiences. It's called the individual subtle body in the East because it exists only at a very fine level of matter, probably at some level of subatomic particle. So, it's all, and this body, it turns out, contributes a lot to emotional experience, lot to experiences. In fact, when it separates from the body that goes into the tomb, guess what happens to the body that goes into the tomb? It's dead, right?
It starts to
So
disintegrate. There's nothing holding it together.
nothing holding it. So that body is contributing to it. We'll call it the subtle body. We'll not call it the soul to get into religious terrain, etc. But it's a subtle body. So if that body is contributing to a lot to experience, emotional experience, life, and regulating it, then if we have methods for working with that body also, one would say our psychotherapy will be much better, outcomes will be much better, right? Not only that, our understanding of selves will be much deeper,
So,
right?
as I understand it, when you're working with this subtle body, okay, um, it's less physical, if you will. It's less solid. Ergo, it's more malleable. You can change things there quicker than you can once it's already physical.
That is what energy workers would say.
Okay.
Much more, for example, when I track, observe the subtle body, myself at the I can change myself faster because I'm going to the source. But there's a caveat. Sometimes, because we also have this other body, this can get the defense can be there in place for a long time. Even the subtle body manipulation does not work. So you have to work with the subtle body and with the gross body. That is why in emotional embodiment, we not only work with the gross body, but we also work with the subtle body.
So,
But
how do you work with the subtle body? I'm really fascinated here.
there are different, for example, there are different models of working with the subtle body, and we don't have the time to go into it. And when the brain whole doesn't help to regulate the brain and the body, because the brain regulates the body, you have a map of the subtle body on the gross body, like acupressure, acupuncture. So by touching certain places, for example, next time if you're agitated, touch your hip and touch your ankle. Put one leg on the other, right? One leg on the other, and touch, let's say, put my left leg on the right leg, and I touch my left hip, right?
Mhm.
And fingers in the groin and left ankle. You will find your entire body, because it works with a particular layer of the subtle body, down regulating. And that's what I used in war trauma courses, because the shell shock of war, ongoing war, you cannot, you do that, it doesn't work. You have to go to another level of the body. And there are different ways to work with different levels of the subtle body, right? But that's not the end of it. Our bodies, both gross and subtle, at the subatomic level, guess what? There's absolutely no separation between you and me and my computer, me and my lamp, and me and the world. So at some level, my body is the entire body of the universe. And I rely on it, right? That's where I get my oxygen from, gravity from. And sometimes when I'm hardening my gross body not to feel an emotion, I disconnect a little bit from the subtle body and disconnect both bodies from the collective body. I call it the collective body of the universe. So so that contributes a lot to emotions and experience. And this is why the science of embodied cognition, emotion, and behavior, a new paradigm in neuroscience, says that cognition, emotion, behavior depends on the body, brain, body, and the environment. Everything is pushed into the environment, our other bodies. No? And so, how do you connect the individual bodies to the collective body of the universe? That you can also do by, because there's a map of connection where to connect one body to the other, and that improves the outcomes even further. But that's not the that's ultimately the fourth body we have is the absolute unchanging body of pure awareness. This is what they found, and many quantum physicists say, even though we cannot measure it and establish it, makes perfect sense. So that body, being aware of that body, makes a life so much easier. And
Does it is it a representation of the balance to be found there? So then we have a blueprint for correction?
exactly, exactly. But the ultimate body, that ultimately there's only awareness that doesn't affect anything, and that's who we are. That's the basis of the universe and all the individuals' bodies in it. And I use it in a very simple, um, uh, technique. Um, I say sometimes people are so terrified and suffering they can't bear it, dissociating. I say, just say this: my body is afraid, I am not. Try that next time. My body's anxious, I am not. You're not dissociating. You're separating your awareness, ultimately who you are, from the experience
So
that's in the changing
developing
body.
your witness, basically.
Exactly, a witness. And the witness is who you are. And everything is in the witness, with the witness does not change. So knowing that can be very therapeutic.
In every format, right?
Every
So
format. It doesn't matter what you're working with. Yeah. So
it sounds like your approach is going to have some real ramifications on PTSD, because I know people that suffer with PTSD, they go through all sorts of stuff, but it's still there. What have you seen as results with this with PTSD?
very good. Very good. I'll give you. Yesterday, I was working in Romania with a woman who has so much PTSD, and so we worked with a subtle body technique. We worked with a collective body technique, and then we, of course, worked with the brain and the body. Ultimately, we have come here to work through something. Ultimately, we felt the fear in the body. We could tolerate it. Then, you know what? We found a finer emotion, sadness. Sadness is hard to get to when you're scared for your life.
Hmm.
So it's very useful actually when you include more bodies, right? We went from no body to one body in psychotherapy. So I'm saying let's go from one body to four bodies. you know Even though I don't write about all the four bodies in my book, I in the last chapter I challenge people to think about it, because I'm going to come up with another book in which I will write about it, and it's again relationship to emotion and its embodiment. So
Well, we look forward to that day. Unfortunately, we are out of time. Dr. Silvan, thanks so much for coming on the show and sharing your wisdom.
thank you very much. It's always a lovely time I have with you when we have these conversations. Your questions are so stimulating.
Oh, thank you. Our guest this hour has been Dr. Raja Selvam, the author of Practice of Embodying Emotions, a guide for improving cognitive, emotional, and behavioral outcomes. His website, integralsomaticpsychology.com. This has been Mission Evolution with Gwilda Wiyaka. For more information or to enjoy past archived episodes, visit www.missionevolution.org. But please be sure to join me right here next time. This mission will continue, bringing information, resources, and support to an evolving world.